Good morning. I'm Ken Szymanski, and today we'll be covering the very important topic of 5 steps to voting safely in person this year. WSGE urges everyone to exercise their basic right of voting, and here in 2020 during the COVID era, more voters than ever chose to vote early. But for those who haven't yet voted and plan on the traditional voting method of casting their ballot at their local precinct this Tuesday, might be apprehensive about doing so in a safe, healthy manner, today's guest will share some timely tips for us. Dr. Reagan Anderson is a former combat doctor and is the author of Universal Death Care, A Solution for Healthcare in the Age of Entitlement, and is joining us today from his home in Colorado. Welcome to the program, Dr. Anderson.
It's great to be here, Ken. Thank you for the opportunity.
So there are many concerns about voting this year because of the pandemic. However, there are measures and best practices we can take to stay safer. If our listeners are voting in person, what steps should they follow?
Well, I always encourage people to see what your options are beforehand. So absentee ballots, voting early, and if you haven't been able to do those things and you're looking to vote in a couple of days, then I think the first thing that we need to do is do the research. So you need to go online and find out where you can vote. Find out, for instance, if you have a pre-existing condition that will allow curbside voting. And find out the conditions in which you will be voting. So are you going to be standing outside for long periods of time? What is the weather going to be like? So that you can plan appropriately and dress appropriately. And I think some of these are universal no matter what the season or what year you're voting in. There are some things like do not wear politically motivated clothing. Do not talk to people or engage with people who are standing in line. One, it's just not smart. You don't want to get in an argument while you're voting. But two, usually we stand closer to each other when we're talking, and we want to socially distance this year.
So it may be that you might be standing inside, but you might be standing outside, and bringing your bottled water, et cetera, is a good idea.
Absolutely. I mean, so being prepared, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, means different things, but especially when you're voting and you do not know how long it will take, you have to wear your sunscreens. You have to bring some water. You need to bring some food if it's going to be a long wait. If you have a medical condition where you have to take your medications, bring those with you so that if it takes longer than anticipated, you don't have to leave and you lose your right to vote.
Now, the voting personnel may or may not effectuate and bring about the 6-foot distance rule. And if they don't, you probably ought to try to do that as the voter yourself, right?
100%. Look, especially during COVID, I think that even if you're perfectly healthy, it is our civic responsibility to protect those who may have pre-existing conditions that would predispose them to a worse outcome if they get infected. So I think that we should socially distance. I think we should be wearing masks. I personally think that we should be wearing gloves as well. Just get those simple gloves like you see the doctors wear and wear those the entire time. And one of the things that is going to help is that if we just plan ahead, in other words, bring your own pen, bring your own black pen. If it's going to be an electronic booth that you're actually pushing a computer screen, bring a stylus. When you're done, just throw that black pen or that stylus in the trash. Wear your gloves. Before you go into the booth, you can put some of that waterless hand sanitizer on the gloves. You vote. You take absolutely nothing from the booth. You don't even take a sticker that says you voted. You just go in, you vote, you throw your pen or your stylus in the trash, then you hand sanitize your gloves, and you leave. One of the things that I see people do all the time is that they're touching their masks and their face all the time because we're not necessarily used to wearing these things. But if you're touching doorknobs and you're touching all sorts of other stuff, and then you touch your mask, you're potentially putting that COVID virus right on your face. So wear your gloves, sanitize after you're done with voting, walk out. When you're completely out, before you get in your car, take off your gloves and then re-sanitize your hands and then get in your car and go home.
Now, are you a proponent of wearing a double mask or a 2-layer mask? And tell us about the realities of that.
if you're someone who has a pre-existing condition, I think you need to be extra cautious. If you have lung disease or if you're elderly or any of these things, you need to be extra cautious. And for those people, I think it is worthwhile to get one of those medical N95 masks and to wear some eye protection. So you can get some safety glasses so that hopefully you're stopping some of the droplets or the airborne virus from getting in your eyes, especially if you're close to somebody, unavoidably close to somebody. I am not a big fan of double masking for the average person. I think that if you are considering double masking, go ahead and spend the $5 and get the N95, which is the medical grade and which will protect you the most.
Okay, you've done your voting. Then it's time to use your hand sanitizer. What's the time to do as you begin to walk away from the actual machine at the polling precinct?
Leave the building. So walk out. You're now outside. Step away from the crowd. Then put the hand sanitizer on your gloves. Walk to your car. Throw your gloves out on the way to the car, and then hand sanitize your hands. And you should be as protected as possible. And then go home. Some people say when you get home, take your clothes off and get in the shower immediately. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not sure how much it will actually help, but it is being a little bit extra prudent, and you need to bathe anyway, so might as well.
Yeah, is it a good idea to get a COVID test after you've voted and you've been in this line for 2.5 hours or whatever the time was?
But please do not go to the voting booth if you are having symptoms of COVID. And we know that some of those symptoms can be as mild as just losing your sense of taste and smell. So if anything weird is happening, then I think it's prudent to get tested before voting. And if you've been in close contact with somebody who has COVID, then you really need to talk to your local healthcare provider to see if it is appropriate for you to vote. So please, this might be one of those times that there's a very small percentage of the population who doesn't know if they're healthy or not, if they're infected or not, who might need to forego voting this year. And I know that's horrible, but I think we have a personal responsibility to try to keep us collectively safe.
Now, earlier we mentioned this possibility of curbside voting if you have a disability or if you're at risk. And North Carolina does allow that, and you would just need to communicate with your polling precinct captain and make that reasonable accommodation request, right?
Absolutely. I mean, please don't do it unless you need to do it. And some of the same precautions can still take place. Wear a mask, wear gloves, sanitize before, don't take anything, don't even take a sticker, and then sanitize after, throw the gloves away. All those sorts of things are very important. But, I think the most important thing that we can do this election cycle is the most important thing we can do regardless of what's happening politically or via infectious disease standpoint, and that's to be as healthy as we possibly can. We know that COVID preys on the unhealthy, so people who have pre-existing conditions. Now, you can't do anything about your age, but you certainly can do things about your diet, your exercise, your mental sanity, and your mental health. All these things that we know that we should be doing, if we just do them, we will have a much better chance of not only living our life up to our potential, but also not getting seriously infected or seriously injured from viruses like COVID. So I think that's the most important thing all of us can do is recommit to our health.
Well, Dr. Anderson, your common sense approach has really been illuminating today. We're so glad you came on our program. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me. Stay healthy.
You've been listening to Community Insight today on WSGE. Today's guest has been Dr. Reagan Anderson on voting safely in person this year. Be sure to tune in again next week when we'll have another timely program aimed at helping you better understand some of the important issues in our community.